For those here for the first time at this conference, welcome. For those who have been with us for a while, welcome back. This is the second panel, and according to the program, of which we have many extra copies, if there's some reason you might actually need one, we encourage you to take as many home with you as you can. This is the panel on breaking the cycle, prevention, and the next generation. We've alluded to the fact in the last day or so that there are numerous studies that have documented that gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered youth are at increased risk for a variety of negative health and mental health outcomes. Unfortunately, including suicide and other self-injurious behaviors. Our panel is going to describe some of the research evidence, including some of their own, in regard to this issue, and to discuss individual and more policy-focused interventions designed to prevent these negative but all too common health and mental health outcomes. It is my pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Professor Margaret Rosario, who is at the City University of New York. Dr. Rosario got her bachelor's degree at Princeton and her MA and PhDs at New York University, and was a postdoctoral fellow following that at the HIV Center for Clinical and Behavioral Studies at Columbia University. She has a very impressive vita. I have a copy of it, anybody interested. And among her many awards and accomplishments, she is a fellow of the American Psychological Association and several of its divisions, and is currently the associate editor of the Journal of Sex Research. It's my pleasure to present Dr. Margaret Rosario.
Thank you for coming, and most importantly, I'd like to thank all of the organizers of this conference. It's a marvelous conference, and I'm so pleased that I was invited to participate in it. And certainly I'd like to thank the Tanner family, whose generous gift has allowed for the formation of this center, who sponsored in turn this presentation and our entire gathering. I'm going to talk today about LGBT youth. And let me see if I can get this working. Okay. And I want to underscore that it's lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth. I am not going to be talking about transgendered youth in any way. And basically the reason that I'm restricting it to LGBT youth is that that is the literature that we have available. It is all focused on lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth. I don't know of any literature that is based on representative samples, which is what I'm going to be talking about, that includes transgendered youth. And just before I start, let me tell you a little bit about what I mean by representative samples, because I know we have a very diverse audience here with respect to disciplines. I'm talking about studies that are completely unbiased because the individuals selected into the study are selected randomly from the general population. Now that population in turn may be defined, say, as drawing from schools or drawing from households, but the point is that they are selected randomly. There is no bias in the sample at all except for knowing the setting. And it's those data to which I'm going to speak and essentially summarize what it is that we know about the health of LGBT youth and what it is that we know about some of the possible mechanisms that might drive those health issues. This presentation sort of really falls nicely behind Ron Stahl's presentation this morning, where Ron talked a great deal about the picture among gay men, MSMs. This will be talking about our youth and essentially adolescents for the most part, although some of the studies do have slightly older young people in there. The other thing that I want to say about the representative samples of which I will be speaking is that those samples are not merely based on our youth, meaning American youth. They are also samples that are based in other countries, New Zealand, Norway, etc. So you're getting a picture basically about what is the status of LGBT youth in the Western world. But most of the studies are based on American samples. So let me see if I can start playing with some of these toys here. Ah, no, okay. Okay, great. So as I said, we have these representative samples, and what the representative samples indicate is that there are massive health disparities between LGBT youth and their heterosexual peers. And just by way of a summary, what I mean here, and I will dive more deeply into these data in a little bit, just to give you a sense, LGBT youth are 2 times more likely to have substance abuse disorders. They are 7 times more likely to report having 6 or more lifetime sexual partners. Again, I want to stress that these are adolescents for the most part. And they're 2 times more likely to have poor body image, and this is an important potential marker for eating disordered behaviors. And now let me just turn to some of the specific findings that we have with respect to each one of these physical health outcomes. Talking about substance use, we have a recent meta-analysis that was conducted on youth, and in fact, Ron Stoll talked a little bit about this study a little earlier. A meta-analysis is where all of the data from all the various studies are taken, they're gathered, and essentially what we wind up getting is a sense across the study, what are the average findings. So they are a summary, if you will, of the studies that have been conducted. And what we see as we compare the LGBT youth to their heterosexual peers is we see elevated rates. So LGBT youth are twice as likely to report consuming alcohol, and this is at the low end, goes all the way up to 4 times as high with respect to cigarettes. And then we see that with respect to other drugs, all the illicit drugs, LGBT youth are 3 times as likely to report lifetime rates of using such substances. Moving along to sexual risk behaviors, we see that LGBT youth, as compared again to their heterosexual peers, about twice as many report ever having sex. With respect to partners, within the last 3 months, that was the time frame that was used in the study, LGBT youth were about 4 times more likely to report having at least 3 sexual partners. And then about 3 times as many LGBT youth as heterosexual youth report using drugs or alcohol before sex. And this is important because obviously the use of substances are likely to cloud judgment, and consequently whether any kinds of protections are used during sexual activity. As to eating problems, here we have a comparison, and we have the males separately. So these are the gay and bisexual males relative to their heterosexual male peers, and the females. And I broke this out basically because there has been this general sense in the literature that lesbian and bisexual youth and women didn't really have a problem with eating disorders or eating disordered behaviors, and that's not necessarily the case. We see that immediately with the first symptom, bulimic symptoms, with the females here, lesbian and bisexual female youth being 7 times more likely to report engaging in those activities than the heterosexual female peers. Across the board, we see that the LGBT youth are elevated relative to, again, their heterosexual peers in these studies. So this is a situation with respect to health-related behaviors, physical health-related behaviors. I'd now like to turn and focus a little bit on mental health problems. Here again, we see health disparities. And again, just by way of quick examples, the LGBT youth are 2 times more likely to have major depression. They're 2 to 7 times more likely to have ever attempted suicide. And specifically, we have a very nice study from New Zealand, Ferguson study, and what I like about this study is that the young people were tracked over time. They looked at psychiatric diagnoses and we find that LGBT youth are 2 to 3 times more likely to have a psychiatric diagnosis with respect either to generalized anxiety, major depression, and also then turning towards to acting out behaviors. We see also elevated rates of conduct disorders. What we also see from this study, which, as I said, tracked the young people into adulthood, is that these disparities persisted. And now for suicide, just to end with that, because suicide is a great concern, it certainly has received a lot of attention in the mass media, and appropriately so. We find really high rates of suicide attempts and suicide ideation among LGBT youth relative, again, to their heterosexual peers. The rates here, I find them astonishing. Within the past year, so this is not lifetime, this is within the past year, we see that about a quarter to a third of LGBT youth have attempted suicide. And obviously then the ideation rates are substantially higher, as high as some of these studies reporting ideation rates occurring in about 2/3 of the young people, again within the past year. The comparable rates for the heterosexual peers are substantially lower. So what's driving all of this? How do we explain these disparities in physical health, in mental health? And Ron is correct, all of these issues are conflated. They're all going together in the sense that we find them all in the same person, or at least more than one of them at a time. And here, the guiding principle or the major hypothesis is that of gay-related stress. It has been used to explain these health disparities. And gay-related stress basically consists of two major dimensions or sets of variables. One consists of experiences of victimization or rejection for being or being perceived to be LGBT. You don't have to be LGBT, but if you're perceived to be that, whatever that actually means, you're going to be a target. And it also includes, in addition to that, the internalization of society's negative attitudes and reactions to LGBT individuals. And here what we have is an internalization of the external stress. We see the individual internalizing that, and then the self operating on the individual, and that happens through what is commonly known as internalized homophobia, or the individual, him or herself, having negative attitudes towards homosexuality, as well as discomfort with others knowing about their sexuality. And here I don't mean just what I'm talking about here is other individuals in general, not specific individuals. As we all know, there may be very good reasons not to have other individuals know about your sexuality if you're gay. So let me tell you what we find. With respect to the victimization and rejection, or at least just to lay the give you some background first, the victimization and rejection may be of various kinds. They may be subtle or overt. They may involve acts of omission or commission, and they can occur across a variety of settings, from the most personal, meaning the self, him or herself, to the family, reaching out into the society, all the way up to the culture in which the individual is embedded. LGBT youth are more likely to be physically and verbally abused than their heterosexual peers. And when we turn to adults, what we find as another marker of this external stress is that 4 times as many LGBT adults as their heterosexual peers report being fired from their jobs. And again, this is with a representative sample, not some kind of potential bias in here. So external gay-related stress is something that is experienced essentially throughout most of life, and it starts early for LGBT youth. The victimization is prevalent. So LGBT youth are 4 to 5 times more likely to be victimized at school than heterosexual youth. And again, these are representative samples. LGBT youth are twice as likely to require medical treatment for the victimization they experience, which indicates that that victimization is indeed serious. The victimization goes way beyond experiencing physical abuse. It includes sexual abuse. It also includes witnessing violence perpetrated on others believed to be LGBT. The youth are 2 to 16 times more likely to be sexually abused than their heterosexual peers. This is based on an analysis of all the studies done in this area. and LGBT youth are twice as likely to witness violence. This is something also that Juan talked a little bit about earlier today. So the victimization that is experienced by LGBT persons, either as victim or witness, and the negative attitudes toward homosexuality that have been reported by heterosexual youth and adults, yes, we have this documented, are hypothesized to lead to the internalization of the stress. So all of that external set of insults that go on are internalized by means of internalized homophobia. Gay-related stress is both external and internal. And what do we know? LGBT victimization is associated with a variety of the very health outcomes that I mentioned to you earlier. More depression and anxiety, greater likelihood of psychiatric diagnosis, suicidality, higher prevalence of alcohol and other drug use, more sexual risk behaviors, and in addition, other markers of adaptation, so that we find higher rates of school truancy among the gay youth and poorer self-esteem. Similar findings have also been found for internalized markers of gay-related stress. Specifically, I want to share with you some of the actual data, and here what you have is a comparison, again by gender, of lesbian and bisexual females with the heterosexual females, and the same for the boys. We have the health markers in the first column there. And the data that you're seeing here is something called Cohen's D, and just let me tell you a little bit about it. The D statistic is a measure of effect size, which means the actual magnitude of difference that exists between two groups. So if you have two groups, you compare them on some phenomena of interest. How different are they from each other? And I just want to give you a reference point. A D value of 0.8, which when you look at these numbers here is really on the low end. A D value of 0.8 is considered a large effect size. An effect size that is apparent to the naked eye. We don't need to do fancy studies with fancy statistics to notice this. Everybody notices this. And just to give you an example of what that actually means, imagine two clusters of girls. One cluster, age 13, the other cluster, age 18, and we are assessing their height. That is an effect size of 0.8. These effect sizes are much larger with respect to the various markers of mental and physical health that I was talking to you about earlier. Notice the last one there, the number of truancies due to safety issues. Why are gay kids engaging in school truancy? To protect themselves. It is a coping strategy, unfortunately a coping strategy that in the long run will not benefit them as they fall behind in their academic work. So some of the strategies that gay youngsters engage in may not necessarily be the best, but they also indicate really the failure, if you will, of our schools, of our families to take care of our children. I also want to suggest to you that the experiences that are related to poor health among LGBT individuals also occur in large samples, representative samples, and among adults. But it also indicates some things other than physical abuse. And this sort of links back with some of the work that Shannon Minter was talking about earlier. What we're talking about here is how the law and the way we constitute, the way we live as a society actually works against gay people. We have a study, it was a beautiful study, very simple issue. This is a representative sample, and basically the states in the United States, that cluster of 50 was divided into two camps. One camp were the states that had laws of one or two kinds. A law either banning discrimination on employment discrimination against LGBT individuals, or it had hate crimes laws targeting LGBT individuals. So if you had a state with one or both of those laws, you were in camp one. On the other hand, we had the other cluster of states that had no such protections. And essentially what was done in this study was psychiatric diagnoses of LGB individuals across these states were compared by these two groups. And what was found was that the LGB individuals who resided in states where there was at least one of these legal protections had lower rates of psychiatric diagnosis than individuals residing in states without those legal protections. Nevertheless, and I want to underscore this, those two laws are not enough. It's a beginning, but not enough. There are many other ways that gay-related stress is experienced, including in the area of victimization. So that when we compared across the states, even within these two camps, LGB individuals relative to their heterosexual peers, the LGB individuals still had higher rates of psychiatric diagnoses. And I think this study for me is one of the most interesting studies I have recently read, and I think it says volumes about what we need to do at multiple levels in order to protect and ensure the well-being of LGB individuals. So, for further consideration, I just want to leave you with a few questions that I thought about as I was ending this talk, particularly in light of the charts that I was given. These are some issues that we might want to think about, and certainly I would be happy to engage in any conversation about them or whatever else you might want to discuss. And those are, have we accounted for all aspects of gay-related stress? Are there really any safe harbors for LGB youth? I didn't mention at all what we know about families, but the family situation is a terrible one indeed. When parents learn about the LGB status of their youngsters, those parents are likely to physically abuse their youngsters. This happens in about 50% of LGB youth in studies. Over time, that diminishes, but nevertheless, that is an insult that has to be experienced by many. Is stress the only pathway to health? And if it isn't, what might potentially explain or moderate the relations between stress and health? And finally, some related questions here. What contextual factors are important for us to consider? And here what I'm thinking about, two in particular. One, time, the impact of time. I was talking about cohorts. People raised in the 50s experience a very different reality than those who are being raised now, or that were even raised, that even came out when I did. And another issue that I think needs very careful attention, and that is, what about racial and ethnic issues? And how does that affect all of this? So those are just two contextual issues to consider. Development is important. Coming out at puberty, as some people do, and here I'm talking about coming out to yourself. I'm not even getting into coming out to others, just coming out to yourself at puberty is going to be experienced differently than if you come out, say, when you're 18, just simply because developmentally you're cognitively in two different spaces. And finally, and I can't help but say this as a psychologist, what individual factors may be involved here that we need to be aware of, that we need to be sensitive to, that might affect all that has been discussed here. So for now, I'd just like to leave it there. And again, I'd like to thank you all for your time.
You know how we just blank it so we can get rid of the... Those of us who primarily do research on the negative impact of one thing on something else have the luxury of doing the research, publishing the research, talking about the research, and getting to limit what we do to that. In contrast, there are those who on a daily basis have to deal with the kinds of issues that we are researching. We're fortunate in this city to have a very active and important resource for the GLBT population in the Pride Center. Our next speaker, Mary Ellen Epstein, is a Rosalind Epstein is a staff member at the Pride Center, works with transgendered youth and adults, as well as with GLB populations as well. And I'd ask you to help welcome her. Thank you for coming, and she's going to talk about the work that she does and that the Pride Center does. Thank you.
Hi. So I think Margaret did a wonderful job laying out all of the research that, I'm not my field to discuss, but talking about all of the risk factors that LGBTQ youth face on a daily basis when they don't have support and safety in any aspect of their lives, in their home, at school, in the workplace, or with their friends and their peers. And one of the findings from a local study in Utah that was conducted by the Utah Volunteers of America found that one of the most common experiences of LGBT youth is that they feel isolated and alone because, they are isolated and alone many times. And that puts them at a higher risk than their straight peers of eating disorders, of drug use, of sexually transmitted infections, pregnancy or getting someone pregnant, becoming homeless, or attempting suicide. And at the Utah Pride Center, we have a lot of programming that aims to reduce the risks of self-harm and of harm to LGBTQ youth. And today it's my pleasure to be able to talk about some of that programming to you. So we provide social support, emotional support, and some tools to help youth to empower themselves and advocate on their own behalf. And first I'm going to talk a little bit about the social supports that we provide. And one of our biggest social supports is our Youth Drop-In Center, which the youth have chosen to name the TINT, which stands for the Tolerant Intelligent Network of Teens. And the TINT is a safe space for youth to express themselves and to explore their identities, which, obviously is a very natural part of adolescence, but as we know, is something that a lot of LGBTQ youth don't have a place to do. They don't have a place to explore their gender expression. They don't have a place to, boast about that girl that you have a crush on that, yesterday she hugged you. Oh my God. So, there's a lot of that goes on. And we also work very hard to create a culture of safety. That's a mutual culture. And we talk to the youth a lot about their responsibility in helping to enforce that culture and talking about, why it's not okay to make jokes about violence and why if you jokingly say, oh, I'm going to kill you, that has a very different connotation to a youth who regularly experiences physical violence in their life. And, nothing makes me happier than when I am in my office and I hear one youth say, that is so retarded. And then another youth says, hey, don't say that here. That's not okay. And, I think it's really powerful because we're not only creating a safe environment, but we're teaching youth how to create that safety, and we're making them responsible for that environment of safety as well. And for the sense of community that they find when they meet peers like themselves and when they do receive that level of peer-to-peer support. And we also provide them with adult role models in the form of volunteers who can both model healthy, happy LGBTQ adult lives, but also help them with modeling things like maybe like relationships, that maybe you're not going to get the best peer advice oftentimes on those kind of issues. And within the TINT, we have one night which is called Genderland, which is focused specifically on transgender and gender variant experiences and identities, although it's now no longer exclusively for that population. But I think that's extremely important to have that time because it provides an extra level of safety for transgender youth to express themselves, to explore their identities and feel comfortable. But it also allows all of our youth, many of whom display aspects of gender variance, to explore those aspects and to talk about what it means to them to have the experiences that they do when a boy is wearing makeup on the street and people interact with him. And a lot of times, they don't know how to process that. So it's really important to have a space for that. We also provide social groups that are another social support. And one of our groups is called FAME, which is an HIV intervention model for gay and bisexual teenage boys. It's based on the empowerment model, which is being run all across the country. And it's also a social-based model, so it allows gay and bisexual boys to socially interact in a alcohol and drug-free environment, and also to learn about condom use, condom negotiation, and to receive that positive peer pressure to use condoms on a consistent basis from their friends, from their peers. We provide Queer Prom annually, which is a huge organizing event. We had 600 people last year attend, and it's an amazing sense of community for young people, many of whom come from all over the state of Utah. They've never heard of the Pride Center. They don't know what the tint is, but once a year they're able to participate in that level of community and feel a reduction in their sense of isolation. And then we do a lot of other different social groups and activities, like we have a weekly queer ballroom dance class. We have an art night. We have a health and wellness night to talk about body image and nutrition and exercise. So we provide all kinds of fun opportunities as well, like that for the youth. We provide emotional support, which takes a much more structured form. We run a transgender youth support group and a queer youth support group, which are really important places for youth to process the physical and emotional violence that they experience on a regular basis in their lives, and the transphobia and the homophobia that they experience, and to talk about it with their peers, because often people have very similar experiences and they're not talking about it in a social environment because it's too heavy, it's too intense. And so to be able to talk about it in a support group with a licensed therapist to guide them through the process is really empowering, really healing, and it's crucial. And another emotional support that we do at the Pride Center is providing support groups for the parents of transgender youth and the parents of queer youth, which is sometimes a different model than what some community centers do, but I think it's really important because not only does it give parents a place to process their emotions about their youth's identity, but we also work very hard to encourage parents not just to accept their young person's LGBTQ identity, but also to celebrate it, and that it's possible to celebrate your child's complete identity. And that encouragement towards celebrating their identity has a huge impact on decreasing the risks of self-harm to your child. And, of course, it also decreases the child's risk of homelessness, which, is an enormous risk factor. It's an enormous issue in our community. And now I'm going to move on to talking about self-empowerment and advocacy, which are really crucial pieces as well to make youth believe that their voice can be heard and that they can have an impact. One of the groups that we run is called Transaction, and it has a focus on transgender topics and transgender identities. And the group comes together to plan social, educational, and outreach events all throughout the year. They planned during November, which is Transgender Awareness Month, they planned a gender conference that was really exciting and allowed members of the transgender, the LGB, and the straight communities to all come together and talk about gender and talk about transgender topics. And it was a huge success, and we're going to be doing it annually, which is very exciting. They're in the process now of planning the first Salt Lake City Trans March. Again, like a wonderful opportunity to experience a sense of community and pride in their identity, and really a public visibility that transgender people have struggled with not having access to. And also, they plan a lot of social events like barbecues and open mic nights and guest performances that can be really important in helping the transgender community have have that sense of community, have a place to come together, socialize, meet each other, talk about their identities in a way that I think transgender people often experience an even greater sense of isolation than LGBT and queer individuals do. So it's really important, and it's really been amazing in the year that Transaction's been running to see an increase in transgender people that are accessing the Pride Center because of all these opportunities. Another advocacy group that we run is called Queers in Action, and it's a group that helps young people learn how to plan and take on events. Right now they're planning Queer Prom. They're deciding the theme, doing all the artwork, the food and the music and everything, so that they're learning the skills of how to do event planning, how to take control of things so that they can reapply those skills to other parts of their lives. Annually, we run a GSA summit, which gives young people the skills to set up and run a GSA in their high school, which is an amazing opportunity for them to advocate for themselves in the school environment, which is a place that in Utah, particularly the Pride Center and other LGBTQ organizations are not able to go. So it's really important to give youth those skills so that they can themselves go into their schools and advocate for themselves, where they are, where they have to be by law. And then the last program that I'm going to talk about that the Pride Center runs is our training program, which we fairly recently started. And one of the roles of the training program is to train people who work with youth in out-of-home care situations, like juvenile justice, like foster care, like work experience programs, that not only are they already serving LGBTQ youth, which many of them are not aware of, but what are the issues that LGBTQ youth are experiencing? How do you acknowledge that? How do you make them feel safe enough that they can come out to you, that they can bring their entire self into the program where you are, and increasing their cultural competency so that there can be a level of safety in different aspects of youth's lives. And another example of some of the work that the training program is doing that's really vital is providing cultural competency to therapists who want to work with transgender young people, or who maybe have heard that there's a need for therapists for transgender young people and really don't know more about it than that. And helping them to understand what are the issues that what are the reasons that trans young people might go to a therapist, that oftentimes it has less to do with mental health issues than with needing to get a letter to access the hormones and the surgeries that they need, and helping to increase the resources that young people are able to access in our community that are friendly to LGBTQ youth, that understand what their issues are, and that are able to better serve them. And I think that the training program is one of the most exciting programs that we're running because we're able to have an impact outside of the Pride Center in the broader community. And by reducing stigma and increasing the information about LGBTQ youth populations, we're really, I think, making a change in the experience that young people have all over our city and all over the state of Utah. So, in short, although LGBTQ youth often feel isolated and are extremely vulnerable to self-harm and to the violence that is inflicted upon them all the time, the Utah Pride Center provides a lot of programming that give youth knowledge, a sense of community and self-worth to reduce their risks of harm and to help them live happy and healthy lives. And I'm really looking forward to your questions and to talk more about some of the broader issues. This was kind of just like a rundown of the information or the services that we provide, but I'm really looking forward to engaging with you more about these topics. Thank you.
I'm especially fortunate to be on the faculty of the psychology department here, particularly these days because with Lisa Diamond and Dave Huebner, our next speaker, we now have a a critical mass of sexuality researchers, all in the same department, all looking at somewhat different and yet somewhat related research areas, and it provides for just a wonderful learning environment, not just for the students we work with, but for us as well. So it is with particular pleasure that I present the third of our speakers, Dr. David Huebner. Dave received his bachelor's degree from Duke University and his PhD in clinical psychology from Arizona State University, his master's in public health at the University of California at Berkeley. Dave's program of research focuses on just the topic we're talking about today, the physical and mental health consequences of discrimination on the prevention of disease that disproportionately affects marginalized groups. Currently, he has research projects funded by the NIMH and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He consults regularly with local community-based health promotion organizations as well as with national organizations dedicated to advancing social justice. Dr. David Huebner.
Ooh, that's bad. Thank you all once again for coming, and to the folks who have helped us organize this, and to the Tanner family for funding this. I don't think we can say that enough. What have we got? So I'm going to be talking about some work that we've done in our lab that I think builds nicely on some of the stuff that we've heard previously throughout the day today, especially the work that Ron has done and the work that Marge has done, and also I think some of the stuff that's happening at the Pride Center. I'm going to focus on schools, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the elaboration that we've done about this sort of basic model of like victimization, bad, health risk behaviors, bad, and try to expand and build upon that and talk more about what are some of the things we can do about this. So the first part of my talk is going to focus on sort of understanding these risks a little bit better and in a little bit more complicated detail. And then the second part of the talk is going to be more about what can we do? What can we do to prevent some of these things from happening? Because I don't believe they're inevitable. I think that's the reason that we're talking about this here today. They don't have to be inevitable, at least. Let's see if I can. All right, I'm not going to go into great detail about this because you've heard about it over and over again now. Gay kids are at risk for substance use and for a variety of other negative outcomes. One number that hasn't been mentioned that I think is really important to talk about, HIV risk is really substantial among our sexual minority, and by sexual minority I mean LGB boys. Before the age of 20, more than 5% of these kids have HIV, according to our best studies. And that's in a general sample. If we look specifically at the African-American boys in these samples, it's upwards of 20%. So 1 in 5 boys before the age of 20 infected with HIV. Okay? I'm sorry, that's 1 in 5 boys, 20%, which is ridiculous and unacceptable. We also know that these kids, and we've heard a lot about this today, face unique risks. And these risks likely contribute to their health behaviors in ways that we currently don't understand very well. Notably, and what I'm going to focus on are the sort of school-based victimization that these kids experience. This is a picture of Carl Walker Hoover, who some of you might recognize. He's a 12-year-old boy, or was a 12-year-old boy from Massachusetts, who hung himself last year around this time. He hung himself after being bullied relentlessly in his school as if he were gay. Now, Carl did not identify as gay. He was 12 years old. He didn't identify as much of anything sexually. And despite his mother's pleas with his school to do something about the bullying that he was facing, nothing was done, or nothing adequate was done. No steps were taken. And finally, Carl took his own life by hanging himself. That's how distressed he was. So these are serious problems, and they have a real face in communities across the country. I'm not going to go into great detail about this because other folks have talked about it. Gay kids are bullied more at school than straight kids are. They get into fights more at school. And there have been some emerging studies that link specifically school-based bullying to kids' substance use. Okay, there is one study that was done by I think Marge referenced it by a colleague of ours in Pennsylvania, showing that link. However, there haven't been any studies of the school-based victimization and its association with adolescent risk behavior. That's one area that I'm going to talk a little bit about here. And most importantly, there have been no studies of the mechanisms. And let me elaborate what I mean by mechanisms when I talk about mechanisms. So we have this model that we've sort of been talking about throughout the day today, where the more you're victimized, the more you engage in risk behaviors, which leads you to be sicker in a variety of ways. Now, I don't believe that kids get bullied at school, and then they go home and say, God, I was bullied at school today. What would I like to do tonight? Well, I think the thing I most want to do is have sex without a condom. That doesn't make sense. There's no sort of psychological link there. There's no mechanism. There's something going on in this space in between victimization and engaging in a risk behavior. And that's sort of the first study that I want to talk about that we've been working on in my lab. There's a guy named Richard Jesser who in the late 70s, 80s developed a theory that he called problem behavior theory. And this was not about LGBT kids. It was just about kids in general. It said, why do kids engage in behaviors that we don't want them to engage in? Why do they engage in these risk behaviors? And he suggested that there are a number of factors operating, but two of them were that when kids decrease their commitment to norm-enforcing institutions, when they feel uncommitted to their schools, okay, and to their churches and to their families, they're more likely to engage in risk behaviors, okay? So the less committed I feel to a norm-enforcing institution, the more likely I am to be risky. Similarly, the more affiliated or more committed I am to a deviant group of peers, and I hesitate to say deviant in this interdisciplinary setting because I know I'm going to get asked about it later. But I'll just say, I think we know what that lunch table looked like in school. It was the kids that didn't fit in, the kids that were doing all sorts of things that placed them at risk. And when you are a child who starts to run with that crowd, we know you are more likely to engage in those behaviors yourself. You learn how to do it. Now, what I think and what our team has been studying is that when kids get victimized at school, there is something that happens. I think it makes sense that they decrease their commitment to school. If you're being bullied at school, if school is not a place where you feel safe, if it's not a place where you feel like you can succeed, you're going to disengage from school, okay? Similarly, if you don't fit in, if you're beaten up, if you're teased, if you're tormented, what's the lunch table that's going to have you? Typically, it's that lunch table of the kids that don't fit in and that are engaging in a lot of risk behaviors. And so what I think happens is that this is how we see victimization leading to risk behavior, at least when we're talking specifically about school-based victimization, is that kids disengage from school and they start to get involved with crowds that they shouldn't be running with. And that's what leads to their risk behaviors. And so this is the model that we tested in some data that we've collected. Data we collected just a couple years ago. Kids had to be in their teens. They had to be either in high school or recent high school graduates and identify as something queer, basically. We interviewed them on computer systems where they listened to the questions being asked so that they didn't have to have a grown-up sitting there with them in the room going like, how many times did you have sex without a condom? We found that this increases the likelihood that they're going to report these behaviors honestly, and we paid them a little bit. So we got about 500 kids to do this, and I'm just going to blow through this because it's not all that interesting. I think importantly, good gender mix here and a very ethnically diverse sample. The majority were non-white. Most were African-American or African-American mixed. And they came from 3 U.S. cities. I can't remember if I mentioned that, but these are from Philadelphia, Indianapolis, and Boston, Massachusetts. And mostly gay, some bisexual, and then a number of kids identified as something other than gay or bi, but they were having sex with people of the same sex. A bunch of measures, and I'll skip through this. If anyone's curious, we can talk about it later. But here's what we find in terms of the frequency of substance use, just basically in this sample to give you a picture. 42% had used a drug at some point during the past year. A third of the sample reported binge drinking. That's more than 5 drinks on one occasion in the past year. Almost half had smoked in the last 30 days. and about a third reported suffering some sort of negative consequence, like being hungover, missing school, something like that, because of their substance use in the last year. So a lot of substance use related problems. That's not surprising given the data that we've seen from all the other people presenting so far at this conference. I focused on the sexual risk behavior in the boys because they are at the greatest risk for HIV infection. Not that the girls are not at risk, but this is a problem among the boys uniquely in some ways. 90% of the guys in our sample of these teenagers had had some sort of sexual contact with another guy during their lives. 83% had been sexually active during the past 6 months. People had, on average, 5 sexual partners in the last 6 months, these boys. And I think this is the thing that gives me goosebumps. 43%, almost half of these kids, reported having unprotected anal sex during the last 6 months, the risk behavior that is highest for transmitting HIV. So a lot of risk here. When we asked them about school victimization, this is what we saw in terms of the specific events that they had encountered. About a third reported that they were afraid of being beaten up at school. 27% had been in a physical fight at school. 1 in 5 had had their property damaged, and 1 in 10 had been threatened or injured with a weapon while at school. And this is not because of other reasons. This is, we asked them, why did you think this happened? And we took out all the kids that said that that happened because of their race or because of the way that they looked or their glasses. These are all kids who said that this happened because I am gay, lesbian, or bisexual. Okay? So this is sort of, again, the first association that's important to determine. And when we looked across risk behaviors, whether we were looking at substance use or sexual risk, what we found was that in every case, victimization was related to more risk behaviors. Okay, so that's the first step that's important to determine. It's not surprising. Again, other people are beginning to show this in their data as well. This is the model, again, that we're trying to sort of test. And in both cases, I had numbers up here, all of our path models. For those of you who are behavioral scientists, and some of my colleagues said, you know what, this is an interdisciplinary audience. They don't care about the numbers. If anyone's curious, if anyone's nerdy like me, come talk to me, and we can go over the numbers. But whenever you see an arrow, that's a significant path. What we see is that kids who are victimized feel less committed to school and affiliate more with deviant peers. And regardless of the model, regardless of the outcome, and I'm going to run through all of them, we find support for this model where kids are victimized, they affiliate with deviant peers, they feel less committed to school, and in all cases, these things are associated with these various risk behaviors. This is the number of days in the past month that they smoked. This is illicit drug use, binge drinking, substance use problems, sexual risk behavior. Across the board, every single risk behavior that we're talking about, we're seeing support for this model. Okay? So, to summarize the findings from this study, youth are reporting a lot of risk behaviors, victimization is related to these risk behaviors, and it seems like victimization is affecting risk behavior by decreasing kids' investment in schools and increasing their affiliations with deviant peers, okay? So what does this say for what we can do about this or what we should be doing about this? First of all, I think we need to have interventions that help keep kids invested in their schoolwork, okay? If they're going to be in these settings that are hostile to them, we need to help support them and find them, show them the way to remaining positively involved in school and in their coursework. I think we also need to help kids maintain pro-social peer networks so that they're not forced to sit with the crowd that is engaging in the risk behaviors. Now, I think we need to keep that crowd healthy regardless of their sexual orientation, but we also want to keep the gay kids out of it specifically. And the most important implication, and this is what I'm going to talk about now, is that safer schools for gay kids, I think, is going to equal healthier kids. That's what these data suggest, and that's not surprising. It's not a radical assertion. How do we make schools safe? This is Sardinia Walker, Carl Walker Hoover's mother, the person who the 12-year-old boy who I showed earlier. She was testifying within 6 months of her son hanging himself. She was testifying before Congress in support of the Safe Schools Improvement Act. It's sitting currently in committee while we're dealing with other issues of the economy and gays in the military and all sorts of other things. But this would help protect kids in schools and make sort of give teeth to policies that would prevent bullying in our high schools. This is a picture of East High School. here in Salt Lake City. Those of you who are local will recognize it as East High School. Those of you who are not local or who have children in your lives recognize it as the home of High School Musical. It's where they film High School Musical. And I think it's somewhat ironic that this school that is filled with singing and dancing gay boys is probably not the safest place for those kids, actually. And that's for a variety of reasons. One, though, is that their school policy around discrimination, I pulled this just last week from their website, East High School does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, disability, or age in its programs and activities. What's missing there? There's no mention of sexual orientation. Now, we know from other settings that when you have explicit policies that name sexual orientation, those settings become safer. Most schools do not have policies that explicitly name sexual orientation. It's also true for East High School right here in Salt Lake. Another way that we can make schools safer are by instituting gay-straight alliances, and this is something that Rosellen talked briefly about. A gay-straight alliance is a club where gay kids come together with straight kids and some sort of faculty advisor, and they try to raise awareness around bullying in their schools. Okay? And by raising awareness, they hope to decrease the amount of victimization that the kids experience and increase the support that they feel and keep kids healthier. Now, these are not non-controversial. In Utah, excuse my gratuitous use of animations, I couldn't resist here. That's a picture of our state capitol. In Utah, the state in the mid-90s passed a law saying that school boards could outlaw clubs that they felt like were immoral or didn't contribute to the development, the pro-social development of youth. And as a result, several school boards, including the one that governed East High School, kicked the gay-straight alliances out of the schools, saying that these don't do anything good for youth. I think that what that says is that we need to do more rigorous research. Well, we need to do better advocacy, but we also need to do more rigorous research around what is the actual effect of these gay-straight alliances in schools. And this is something that our group has also been working on. So the model here, the ideal model for a gay-straight alliance is that by having a gay-straight alliance in a school, there's less anti-gay bullying that happens in the school, and the kids are healthier, okay? Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Actually, there's not been any support for this, no research on this until now, I think. One of the challenges in doing research like this is that we know that gay-straight alliances aren't sort of randomly distributed around the country. They're more likely to exist in liberal places. So if you're in Berkeley, California, you're probably more likely to have a gay-straight alliance in your school. And we also know that it's going to be easier to be gay in Berkeley, California than it is in Salt Lake City, Utah. So there's this confounding influence of sort of demographic factors of your school that make it very difficult to study this relationship. But fortunately, we now have data from the National School Climate Survey, which is a national study of gay and lesbian kids, over 5,000 kids from all 50 states, ethnically diverse, and it includes data on these important demographic confounds. So like what region of the country is your school located in? What is the population density of your school? Is your school public versus private? How many college-educated adults are in the district? How much poverty is there in your school district? And so when we control for these factors, we can sort of more reliably talk about the influence of a gay-straight alliance in a school. And this is what we find. We find that having kids who have a gay-straight alliance in their school, regardless of whether they participate in that club, have greater self-esteem, less depression, and less anxiety. And that is not explained by any of these demographic variables. So it doesn't matter whether you're in Berkeley or Salt Lake City. We've controlled for that in these analyses. Having a gay-straight alliance, healthier kids. And what we see is that the reason that this happens is that when there's a gay-straight alliance in your school, you hear less homophobic language in your school, and you're less likely to be victimized. And both of those things are associated with these mental health outcomes. So I'm hoping that as we increasingly sort of do research like this that documents that gay-straight alliances are actually helpful for our kids, that we can sort of bully the government into allowing us to have them. And now currently East High School, incidentally, does have a gay-straight alliance that's allowed. So that's fantastic. There are also national organizations that are working to make schools safer for kids. The Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network is one of those. I'm going to have to go back. Can you turn the sound on for the GLSEN recently partnered with the Ad Council. You might remember them from Only You Can Prevent Forest Fires days. They do public service announcements every year on some cause that they care about. And this year, they chose us, I'm on the board of GLSEN, to support. And our ad campaign was targeted at getting kids to stop using homophobic language and specifically to stop saying, "That's so gay," when they mean that something's stupid, and I'll show you. Does this sound on?
Yo, check out this chef, right? Right? That's so gay. That's really gay. Dude, look at those hands.
Please don't say that.
What?
Don't say that something is gay when you mean that something is dumb or stupid. It's insulting. It's like if I thought this pepper shaker was stupid and I said, man, and this pepper shaker is so 16-year-old boy with a cheesy mustache. Just saying. When you say that's so gay, do you realize what you say? Knock it off.
These ads aired all over, have been airing all over the country in the last year, and we're in the process of trying to track to see how many kids have seen them, whether we think that they've had an influence. And we were also, I want to just thank Wanda Sykes for doing that for us. She did this for us for free before she came out, actually, agreed to be a part of this public service announcement campaign. We also had Hillary Duff, who was fantastic, in a different PSA that sort of had a similar theme. But we're showing these all around the country with the hopes that we can, again, make some sort of structural change in the climate that kids are experiencing in schools, and with the hopes that by doing that we will improve their health. I'd like to acknowledge a lot of people who made this research possible, the folks who paid for it, many people who are here in the room, also my colleagues Don and Lisa and Brian and Kendrick and Jordan, who are fantastic and help us think through these issues. And I'm looking forward to our conversation, which will begin immediately, I guess. Thanks.
Okay. We've got plenty of time for questions. Yeah.
Literature about, like, how much do you care about your schoolwork, how often do you cut school, things like that.
So one of the things I was wondering is whether parents, sort of bringing in some of the work this morning, whether parents, I don't know if you have the parent data, but whether parents could moderate that victimization, because we know that parent involvement, monitoring, and acceptance is so important for school involvement.
Yeah, so we have data on parental monitoring. We also have data specifically on parents' positive and negative responses to their kids' sexual orientation, and those are some of the models that we're planning on testing. We haven't done that yet. I have a colleague, Rafael Diaz, who's a mentor of mine. What he says, he doesn't believe that it's going to work. He's like, if you're being beaten up at school, I don't think anything's going to help. It doesn't matter what's going on at home. I don't know that that's the case. We're going to look at that in our data, but we haven't yet.
It raised a question for me. The sort of talk this morning was, boys are so compromised, it seems. They're so at risk. And, you know, some of your work, Lisa, this morning was also talking about how boys, the expectations, the stereotypic expectations for them are so high. So I was sitting here and thinking, if I was a parent, I don't know that I'd let my kid go to school. And so I wondered if there was some models about, you know, this sort of happened in the feminist movement where there were special schools for girls. And actually, it seemed to be very helpful for looking at math anxiety and math performance, and whether there's been any discussion of, you know, some environment that is really quite safe for these kids, because it seems like they're incredibly at risk.
Yeah, there is actually. So, in reference to the first part of what your comment, one of the things I wanted to mention is that what we're seeing is that parents actually don't do the things that are most supportive of their kids. When their kids come home and they say that they've been bullied, the typical response from a parent, sadly, is to say, well, maybe if you didn't dress that way, they wouldn't pick on you. So as opposed to sort of like doing what they should be doing and marching into the school and saying, what the hell's going on here, they're actually subtly, and not in ways that they're trying to be helpful, but they're actually subtly blaming their kids. Like, well, if you weren't so girly, maybe they wouldn't pick on you. I think Margaret can probably talk about the settings issue. There's a school in New York City that's sort of become a model. I don't think it's feasible to have anywhere other than in New York City necessarily, or in a couple of major urban areas, but it's the Hetrick Martin Institute, which is actually all-gay high school that they've experimented with. And I don't know a lot about it other than it exists. I don't know if you can speak to it at all.
I just want to, before I get into, it's known as the Harvey Milk School now, before I get into that, just to respond to the lady who was standing there, I think PTA groups would be wonderful. You used the word moderate, and I think if they came out with clear policies about we need to take care of all of our kids in our school, regardless of who or what he or she is, that would go a long way of setting the tone in the school. A lot of times, I think school administrators are afraid of the parents, i.e., what kind of political ruffles may be disrupted in the community. The lady who was standing there, I think PTA groups would be wonderful. You used the word moderate, and I think if they came out with clear policies about we need to take care of all of our kids in our school, regardless of who or what he or she is, that would go a long way of setting the tone in the school. A lot of times, I think school administrators are afraid of the parents, i.e., what kind of political